Gente, a gente vai agora para o nosso penúltimo encontro, que é o que a gente chama de Ask Me Anything, pergunte-me qualquer coisa. A gente sabe que tecnologia é fundamental, é uma das coisas que vai embasar o aprendizado o tempo todo, vai embasar o mundo, então a gente não pode deixar de aproveitar as oportunidades todas. E a gente trouxe aqui um dos maiores experts nesse assunto. O Christopher Lind, ele é fundador da Learning Share, ele é CLO do ChainMed, é também host de um podcast maravilhoso. Podia até botar o link do podcast dele aí, o Learning Tech Talks. Chris, bem-vindo. Welcome on board. Com vocês, Christopher Lind.
Hello, Christopher. How are you?
You know what? I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
It's amazing to have you here. I'm particularly excited because I am a fan listener of your podcast.
Thank you.
So yeah, last night I was like listening a couple of the episodes too, just to make sure that we got all the questions here for you. So yes, just a refresh. Here, Chris, I'm here with Conrado.
Hi there.
Just want to say hi.
Yeah.
Good to see you again.
Where are you talking from?
I am in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So way up north where we got 4 inches of snow.
Oh, very good, very good.
Today, just so you know, today's probably what, 70 degrees in Brazil, and we are already wearing a jacket and a sweater.
Exactly.
And I'm in a t-shirt.
Exactly. Exactly. So I was thinking like he may be California or something like that.
Yeah,
No.
maybe not.
Okay, awesome. So just a good reminder for everyone that is watching us, you can put your questions also in the chat. I have a couple here for Christopher. Like Conrad said, it's going to be Ask Me Anything session about learning technology, and I will add learning culture too, because we cannot talk about learning technology without addressing the elephant in the room that we'll be addressing at all this time that it is learning technology. So Chris, are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's just do it. Love that. So first question here I have for you. Everyone always wants to talk about the future of learning and the bigger future of work. But it's hard to see the future when everything is changing so fast. So what will not change about learning and L&D in the future?
That's actually a really good question because I think a lot of times people get really overwhelmed with all the changes and they feel like they can't keep up. But if you look underneath the surface, there's actually a lot of consistency that is still spanning throughout. And actually I deal with this with my teams a lot as they're kind of, you can imagine what it's like to have to work for me. And so, you know, when even Aaron's presentation, I loved his presentation because when you look underneath the future of, okay, we've got immersive tech, we have all this personalization, machine learning, AI, all this stuff that's happening. Still, the consistency of understanding a user experience and understanding where is an employee right now, what do they really need, what are they working on, how does that fit together? That connection between that is consistent. Now, the execution of what you do about that is changing, and I think that's the part that can feel a little overwhelming. But there really is, when you look at how we approach learning design, the way we approach learning delivery, it's still very consistent in terms of what good looks like underneath in terms of the actual practices. And I think that's where I liked where Aaron said, he talked about the fact that is this technology just eradicating what we've done before? No, it's augmenting it. And I think that's really this key skill is figuring out how do you take all these new and rapidly changing technologies and then build them into the best practices, the learning science, the things that we know and are familiar with. How do you use those two together?
And connected to what you just said, what is the role of tech on building that learning culture, or even like blocking that learning culture too? Because we know have like the both sides, right, of building and impending to have the learning culture. So what's the role of tech?
From my perspective on this one, tech is just an enabler. And I think that's where sometimes things fall apart is when we approach technology like it's going to be the thing that makes it happen. So even when I look at some of the things new tech is offering, if you're not doing those things now, if you haven't figured out how to fundamentally execute those in the environment you're in today, technology is not going to magically make it happen. You're not going to suddenly buy the latest LXP or send everybody an Oculus and all of a sudden connection and things like that are going to happen. You have to be doing those things now and then say, well, how could we scale or improve what we're doing using technology? So I think that's where the connection, it's just an enabler of what the culture is and further refining and accelerating it.
But do you think that it does exist some technologies that does not help nowadays?
I would say, I'm going to be careful with this one. No, if you're using it right. And I think that's kind of the key variable in that, because where I see it negatively affect the culture is an organization pursues technology expecting it to do something it was never designed for, or expecting it to create something that wasn't there. And then the technology ends up being a distraction or a deterrent to what's happening with the workforce, and people get frustrated. And again, they tend to blame the tech and say, well, that tech is bad for the culture. It's like, well, no, you just over-indexed, or you used the wrong tool for the job, and now it's causing problems that you could have avoided had you maybe pursued the right technology or used it appropriately.
I love what you just said, because we were talking yesterday about this. A lot of companies, LXP is getting like pretty famous in Brazil too, and the rest of Latin America. 4 years ago, when I started working at Degree, no one knew what an LXP was. So it's a good example, right? Some people underuse the technology that they have in their hands. So putting any brand on the side, LXP is just an example that I'm giving to you. What is how the L&D team can start also, understanding more about tech, because a lot of them, like you said, just bring the technology and it will be the biggest one that is going to transform everything. And what you said, it's perfect. It's just an enabler. It's not what is going to transform. But at the same time, L&D needs to work more close to tech to understand this different technology and what their roles are. So what they should be doing better today?
So I think there's a couple things. There's three that come to mind. First of all, one, I really have pushed my teams and really anybody I interact with to be really, really, really good at the L&D core. Because like I said, tech's an enabler of it. So if you're kind of mediocre at experience design, or you're mediocre at delivery, that tech you're not going to really get the most out of it. So really kind of maximizing your capability at the L&D core is a big part of it. I think the other one is tech has always been my sweet spot. I've always loved tech, but I recognize a lot of people in L&D that's not. And there's a little bit of fear of, does this mean we all have to be tech experts? And my answer to that is no, you don't need to go deep in tech, but you do have to have a fundamental understanding of how it works. So you need, and more than just, AI. I mean, you need to understand, well, how are machine learning algorithms affecting adaptive learning? And do you need to know what they are and all that? No, but you need to understand kind of the concepts of this, because that's going to help you make decisions on, okay, if we're doing this, is it even possible to better enable that through technology? And to be able to understand that, the best way to do it is to actually learn, well, what are these different technologies? And that's largely why I started the live stream that I did, was because I recognize for me, it just comes as second nature, but for a lot of people it doesn't. And so to try and help people understand those connections was why I got into it. I think the other one though, and this may sound counterintuitive to practitioners, but I love talking to vendors, and I always have. And I encourage people to talk to vendors. And I think sometimes we're afraid to, because either one, we're not comfortable with the conversation, or we're afraid we're going to end up getting asked to buy something and we don't know how to say no. But even in my early days, I spent a lot of time talking to vendors out there who were exploring new things and just having conversations. It doesn't mean you have to buy Degreed just because you have a conversation with Degreed. And I think those three things are really actionable steps that can help people become more familiar with the tech and know, hey, when do we use this? When do we use it well? How do we look 2-3 years down the road and see where we might be so that we can align those two?
Yes,
Very good.
100%. Before just Conrado can ask one question, I'll give a quick example of CECINT. Sorry, I have a hard time here to do the translation. They spoke to us.
It's a client, right?
It's
It's
a
a
client,
company?
but like, exactly what Aaron just said. Christopher, sorry, just said. They spoke to us 4 years ago and was, hey, I don't have a place for y'all here. I keep hearing about this new technology. Just tell me what it is and show me how it works. Simple as that. My job there was just educate someone what a new technology exists. Nothing like more than else. And now they became like, now they come back and said, hey, now we are ready for this. So it is just setting up the right expectations too. I'm here just to learn. But if you don't go and start finding out what those technologies are, you're not going to be able to even like evaluate in the future. So I just love what you said and just want to bring my vendor view here really quick to say that it is okay. Nothing's going to happen if you just come to us or any other vendor say, hey, I'm curious about what is that? We'll talk about and that's fine.
We have some questions from the audience, and they're pretty interesting, actually. The first is, if you can give an example of a misuse of technology in learning. Just one.
An example of which one?
Of misuse.
Misuse?
Yeah. Just one, just one.
Yeah, okay, just one?
Here's
All
the
right.
list. Let me just give you the list.
Okay.
Or the most common, or one that's pretty common way of not using tech in a good way.
Okay, so let me give one good example, and I think we run the risk of this as immersive tech is coming because we saw this happen, and this is timely. When COVID hit, and this may seem like an obvious one, but when COVID hit, everyone needed to go virtual. And I understand that even within some of my own teams at the time, there was a need to move things very rapidly into a virtual environment. And it worked to some degree because people had no other option. But the problem was when we just took what we were doing before and dumped it into a virtual platform very quickly without actually doing the exercise of experience design and thinking about, okay, this is a different user now we're interacting with, and they're in a different environment and they're at a different mental state than they were before. And we just say, well, we're just going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it differently with technology. It caused a lot of problems. I mean, it worked because we had no other option, but now as we're coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot of orgs that are looking at what they did because they had to very quickly and going, well, this isn't working and that's not actually going to stick. And the problem is, and I think this is where if you don't recognize it for what it is, the problem is people will look at it and go, oh, see, Zoom doesn't work for virtual delivery. And it's like, no, Zoom works fine if you actually deconstruct the experience and rebuild it for Zoom. But if you just took what you were doing in the class and put it in Zoom, it'll work when it has to, but then coming out when it's not the only option, then it won't continue. And again, that may be an overly used example, but it's one of the most common ones that I see, especially right now.
That's very good. And what do you think is the best use of Zoom meeting, this type of meetings, embedded in a good learning experience?
So I pushed my teams on this just a couple of weeks ago. I said, we're going to use Zoom the right way. And what that is we're going to use this for rapid collaboration and brainstorming and connection. That's it. So for leadership development, we're going to use Zoom the right way. And what that is they're going to be short. And again, forget the time thing, but we just happen to for this, because based on this, what we found was in the business, our leaders needed opportunities to connect with other people facing similar challenges and just talk about them. They just needed to talk about what are you doing with it. And I said, we can do that in Zoom because while yes, maybe in an ideal world, we'd pull them all into a conference room and do this, they're distributed across the US, the time to do it, it would be impossible to ever make this happen at any sort of scale. So we brought them together for 45 minutes and we shut our mouths. My rule was you talk 10%, they talk 90%. And we just put them into small groups around these big challenges that they were facing, and we let them talk. We had a couple conversation starter questions to keep them on track, and that's it. And so for 15 minutes, they discuss and problem solve together. Then they switch topics, discuss and problem solve together. They do it a third time, and then they go. And watching the engagement and participation, and even just some of the problems that they've been trying to solve improve, has been, and it didn't take very long. And I think that's where Zoom can be really powerful for bringing a group of people together quickly to discuss things. But you shove a PowerPoint and you start talking at them for an hour, you're not using it right.
Perfect.
No, you lose people the same way that you lose people in a classroom, right? When you're just the one talking so much for so many hours and one PowerPoint there. So it's no different,
Yep.
but with the Zoom, we are being overstimulated, to your point. Like we have phones, we can, not put the camera. So yes, that is a really
Yep.
good example how we can use and adapt, the technology to adapt our new formats of training. One of your podcasts that I was listening to, you mentioned that the word skills, you throw any conversation and you start having a conversation, right? You just talk about skills. It's like one of the buzzwords today too. But also culture. Culture seems to be one of those words that everyone is saying, right? It's like how,
Yep.
but not everyone really understands what culture is. So when we start talking about learning culture, in my conversations and Conrado conversations too, it's all the companies, I want a learning culture. I want to enable learning culture here. I want to change my learning culture. But when you actually ask, like, hey, tell me what learning culture is for you, it's like people get a little bit stuck, in the answer. So we all want to hear from you. What is learning culture for you? How do you define? That's the first question. And what does good look like?
So I always love when the learning culture thing comes up, because my response to that is always, you have a learning culture. Like, it exists. People are learning all the time, whether you want them to or not. It's just the nature of people. They learn things, they figure things out, they do that. It's just a matter of, is it happening the way you want it to, or are you enabling it? So to me, I don't really separate learning culture from work culture. It's the culture of the company. What does it feel like to work here? I mean, what does it feel like as an employee to work here? And yes, there's subcultures in different groups, but at the end of the day, the culture is really, what does it feel like, and what are you encouraged to do when you're doing your work? And so I think that then breaks down this effort where you're trying to create a separate learning culture distinct from everything else, instead saying, well, what is the culture of work? And if the culture of work is, we really want to be more innovative, we don't want people just doing the same thing that they've always done, well, then learning can play a role in saying, how do we encourage that kind of behavior? Because at the end of the day, learning is behavior. And so how do we encourage the kinds of behaviors we want to see in our work culture? And I think that's where you can start to say, well, there's just culture. That's all there is. There's just culture. And then how do we facilitate the kind of behaviors we want to see in that culture, which are heavily connected to learning?
Very good. Again, simple and perfect to the point. We have two questions here from the audience regarding how to insert citizens, either elder citizens or people that don't have a lot of experience with technology. How to create an environment for them to participate in the learning tech world?
So I think, accessibility is a big part of this. And I think this is where I hate even age stereotyping things, because sometimes there's this assumption that, oh, millennials and Gen Z, they get tech. And that's not necessarily true either. So while you have your elderly generations who may struggle with adoption, I know plenty of elderly people that I jam out with in VR, and they're just fine. So it's not so much a stereotype of age, but more thinking about, what is the tech acumen of your audience and where are they? And I think this is where, as professionals, we can look at the future of where things are at, but we also then have to look at, where are we today and what is that journey to get there? And some of that is just making sure you're building the roadmap and the pathway for people to figure that out. I think about how often, I just think back to when mobile phones first came out, or smartphones, and how often people just were handed a smartphone and expected to know what to do with it. Well, no matter how tech savvy you are, you're a baby user the second you get that thing. And I think we sometimes forget that because where we are is much further along by the time we roll it out. And so I think when it comes to accessibility, you really need to think about, okay, where is anybody when the first time they get this, and what are those entry points to get them built in, and build the roadmap. I think it's good change management more than just going, well, we've got this user, so let's stereotype them into this category, and we need to, only use this kind of technology. Because I think that'll be a self-limiting cap that you're going to put on yourself. Now, that said, technology is really enabling things that we couldn't do before. Just as an example, I won't mention who, but there's an organization that does a lot with elderly folks that I've advised. And one of the things we're using is we're doing a lot with natural language processing and Alexa, because small screens looking at things is harder. But speech is much more natural. And so being able to talk and ask questions and have Alexa ask questions and give information in response to questions is a much more natural comfort zone for people. And NLP is getting to a point where it's pretty conversational in terms of AI. And so being able to say, okay, well, yeah, but that's not just elderly people. I worked with one organization where we did this for the sales teams so that the sales teams could fill out Salesforce without having to fill out Salesforce when they got home from work. They just got in the car and Alexa asked questions, and you just talk to Alexa about how your meetings went, and it populated Salesforce. So I think there are some ways when we think about accessibility where tech can dramatically improve it. But I just always caution people not to stereotype age groups, because that may lead you going down a path where you go, oh, well, it's Gen Z, we can send them all an Oculus and it'll be great. And that's not the case. It's just not.
That's amazing. What's your take on the metaverse?
I love talking about this one. Actually, I love talking about all things tech. I think the metaverse has the potential to be Zoom at the beginning of the pandemic if we're not careful. The possibilities of the metaverse are incredible. I've got headsets sitting around my house. My kids and I go explore, different worlds in the metaverse. I collaborated with my team. Every week we do leadership team building in the metaverse. We build sandwiches for werewolves. So the possibilities of what you can do with this new emerging tech are endless. But the risk, going back to my Zoom example, is if you just simply take everything you do and stuff it into the metaverse, you're going to create a really bad experience. Or if you think that someone's just going to naturally pick this thing up and sit in it for 8 hours in the middle of their day, they're not. And so I think it really is about the possibilities of, okay, where are people and what are they doing and how do we tap into that? And I think the other piece with this is, with the metaverse, I think we still aren't at a point where we're thinking beyond the possibilities. So as an example, I had a conversation the other day and we were talking about the impact of the metaverse on training. And this individual said, well, yeah, like we could deliver training in it. And I said, well, I mean, yeah, but let's think about this on the no, feel, do continuum. What experiences could we give people that change the way they show up to work? And one of these experiences we ended up talking through was, what if we could actually take you to the environment our patients are in, that we can't scale that through traditional means. There's just no way to do it, but we can using the metaverse. And I think this is where the opportunity to push our thinking beyond just, well, we were doing this, now how do we do that in the metaverse, and say, what are the things we could never do? And now the possibilities are there. And I think that's where it's extremely exciting. But is it going to mean we don't do any of the other stuff we do? No, it plays a key role in it. And I think that's where we have a lot of work still.
Very good. Thank you a lot. It was amazing. I will send you an email to ask about your setup, because the light's beautiful, the image is perfect, everything. He's
the tech guy, man.
Yeah, I have to know what you're doing over there, because it's perfect. And more important than the image, your thoughts were amazing. So thank you a lot for being here with us this morning here in Brazil.
Hey, thank you for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.